All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Dion's Daily Dose. We are starting into the primary season, which is always a fun time, isn't it? But we have several candidates that'll be coming on in the next month until primary hits. But tonight, we're specifically focusing on Superior Court number 3 in LaPorte County. And there are 2 people running for the Republican nomination for that spot. Our first is our guest tonight, which is Kurt Earnst. Now, the last election before, he had ran for something else, and we had him on the show prior. And unfortunately, since then, I don't have my studio anymore, so it has to be remote. I thought it was more intimate with the studio. Guys, we're looking for studio space. If you or someone you know has an empty building, yeah, I'm just kidding. Look, we're getting into this, and I think it's really important for people to get to know the candidates. So Kurt has been living not Michigan City, LaPorte County for the last 30 plus years, but I'll let him tell you all about the qualifications that he brings to the table, and then we'll get into the fun questions. Kurt, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me and taking the time this evening. My name is Kurt Earnst. I am a candidate on the Republican ticket for Superior Court number 3. I believe that with experience comes wisdom, and I want to bring my 29 years of trial experience in criminal and civil litigation to the bench in Superior 3 and continue on the strong foundation of the judges that have preceded what will be Judge Thorne's, of course, last year as the incumbent judge. As you said, I've lived here since my graduation from law school in 1996. Up until 2024, I was with the law firm of Brady, Nelson & James, engaged in general litigation. For the past year, I've been a federal community defender, which is basically a person that provides legal services for those that can't afford it in federal court, funded by a not-for-profit corporation in Indiana. One of my biggest, proudest things is being in Superior 3 for almost every month since 1996 to 2024. Was being the team that created the Veterans Court program, which I'm very proud of, that it gave veterans who, of course, had fallen through the cracks of our criminal justice system a chance at a second lease, a chance on getting the treatment they may have otherwise not received or the mentorship they didn't receive. In some instances, we even helped give them service dogs or help them find housing or jobs or transportation. And I was honored to be part of that program that assisted veterans. And it's something very big. My father, disabled vet, met several of my uncles served in the military. One of my grandfathers served with Patton in World War II. And so it's a very big part of what I want to see a program that I helped start continue forward as it is administered by Superior Court number 3. Throughout my career, I was frequently asked by judges to serve as a temporary judge for the day, including Superior 3. In fact, a lot of times I was the first person they would call, and I would honorably serve unless I had other commitments, including one time where I was sidelined for a couple of months with a broken foot I sustained as part of a structure fire. I believe in public service, and I believe that being a judge is the highest calling a lawyer can have for public service. I've been a past teen court judge volunteer. I've been a past board member and a board president of the Boys and Girls Club in Michigan City. And what's very also near and dear to my heart, a 28-year member of the Long Beach Volunteer Fire Department as a volunteer firefighter, serving the last 2.5 or 3 years as chief. So I have a diversity of experience and leadership and a dedication to public service that I certainly would like to bring to the voters of LaPorte County, and of which I'm asking for their vote.
Awesome. That's wild. I mean, that's a lot. So with your varied experience, right? Like you said, you helped start the Veterans Court, which is administered under Superior Court 3,
right,
which you're running for. So I can imagine that's a big deal for you and a big motivator for why this particular court, right?
Very, very much so. It's personal for me. It's something that I saw some of the people when we first started, people from Afghanistan, Iraq, young people that hadn't got the help, also people that got Desert Storm, even Vietnam veterans that continue to struggle because of their service. And again, talking about my grandfather, he served under Patton in World War II. I remember being a kid playing Monopoly with my grandmother, and he would be in the bedroom screaming, still having nightmares well into his 60s. He stopped having when he got Alzheimer's disease, but I remember even then that he still struggled with that to that day. And that obviously this is something all of our veterans have. And to be in a position of experience to where I can make sure that program maintains intact and build on the foundations of Judge Curta and then Judge Thorne to make that a continuing problem solving court, which I think is very critical to the citizens of LaPorte County.
So what, if you don't mind me asking, what is the difference between is Veterans Court, is it a separate system, or is it just the I guess kind of taking into account the different experiences of veterans?
Well, Veterans Treatment Court is what we call a problem-solving court. And we have several in LaPorte County. We have the drug court, which Judge Friedman administers, the Veterans Treatment Court that Judge Thorne administers. They're in the process of putting forward a more comprehensive mental health court. They've had one up and running in circuit court for juveniles. I think they're looking to expand it to adults. And then Judge Stallbrink does what's called a reentry court for people that are incarcerated looking to go back into society. Okay. And what they found with these various courts, and specifically Veterans Court, is that there was a need, that these courts were seeing a repeat amount of offenders that were veterans suffering from issues that clearly were derived from their military service. Mm-hmm. And that was the only reason. I mean, it would maybe be a drug addiction, an alcohol addiction, a mental health addiction, a domestic violence situation. And they were seeing these people repeatedly, and they realized there was a need. And eventually the program was begun. And then LaPorte County, I think it's probably 12, 15 years ago, I think now, started following in that footsteps of trying to say, we need to find some way to do that here. And I think it was more 15 years ago, but it was before Judge Thorne. And we felt that there was a need for that in this community. There was a reach out. I was on the public defender staff, and I was asked by the senior public defender if I would be the liaison, both to help get it started and also to be the team member that would go at least twice a month to meet with the team, to talk about various people and or to represent them at the court sessions if need be. Like if they were facing a termination or a violation, they at least had counsel in there that could advocate for them, not only in the team meetings, but also in court proceedings that the court did twice a month.
Okay. All right. So like you said, a problem solving court. So the idea, it seems, is to kind of get to the bottom of the issues and to try to rectify those at least as much within the court's power to do so.
Correct. The team was comprised of various people. We had a prosecutor, we had a defense attorney, we had someone from probation, someone from the sheriff's department, local law enforcement. We had a liaison from the Veterans Administration, from a local mental health coordination, to where we could make sure that we were coordinating with them, getting the VA benefits they needed, getting them the treatment they needed, providing transportation if necessary, getting them the mental health they needed. One individual, we helped get him a service dog. We also would pair them with mentors. These were veterans that would volunteer their time, that would meet with them, that would let them call them, take them out to breakfast, encourage them to maybe join the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, or other associations, to help them and say, hey, I was once in your situation too. I know how you feel, and here's how I can help you get out of it. And so it was a very comprehensive program that had tried to assist all of the needs that, quite frankly, a lot of times these veterans were not getting, and to this day still are not getting from our government. Yep. And that this was, unfortunately, it's not a hammock, but somewhat of a safety net to make you see if they don't fall any further, and we can maybe hopefully boost them up again.
Right. But it sounds incredible. I wish more jurisdictions would take that into account and try their best to, I guess, overcome what they can. So switching gears a little bit. Okay. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a court case in the UK. It just happens to be overseas right now, but it's happening more and more, where I'm gonna throw something up on screen real quick. It's gonna be a little weird, but let's see. Okay. All right. So for those of you listening in, it's just a headline that says, judge says witness wore smart glasses to sneakily inform their testimony. And very super quick rundown is a judge in the UK caught a guy on the witness stand with smart glasses and earpiece listening via Bluetooth to an attorney who was on a phone call with him. And the only reason he got caught is because there was audio feedback. And so they caught him. We're seeing a more and more rise of not just smart technology in court, but also lawyers coming to court using Chat GPT to write their stuff, or rely heavily on stuff where the AI hallucinates and these court cases that it's quoting don't exist. Have you seen that yourself? And what are your plans to address that?
Well, I have seen cases when I had juries where, in fact, members of the jury were posting things online or on social media during deliberations, and they were caught because the court in question had a court administrator that monitored those things,
Oh,
and they were,
nice.
of course, dealt with. I do know that there was another juror at one point that did something as well, and frankly came very close to be found in contempt. Obviously, the law sometimes is a bit behind technology.
Yeah.
When I was in law school many moons ago, they had, of course, the O.J. Simpson trial. And of course, I think we saw from that having cameras in the courtroom was not the proper way to do things. It seemed like a lot of the lawyers were playing to the cameras, even the judge to an extent. And in a lot of ways, a lot of my classmates and contemporaries found that was contrary to the best interests of justice.
Okay.
I know in this state, a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court allowed that if a trial court permits it, cameras can be put in the courtroom, but it has to be on a case-by-case basis based upon the judge. I've not been a big fan of seeing such things. Now, granted, I don't know that in Superior 3 there would be a case of interest, shall we say,
Right.
that would rise to that level. But I've been involved with cases in private practice where we had the Chicago news there, we had South Bend news, sometimes even national news, and where you had to navigate that, and it's certainly much more difficult if it's interfering with court proceedings. So there is a right to the press, there is the First Amendment, but there is also time, place, and manner restrictions that can be put in place, because at the end of the day, the people in the courtroom are looking for justice, and you don't want to do anything as a judge that would interfere with that.
Okay. So I'm obviously I do this show. I'm a huge proponent of freedom of the press.
Right.
But I agree with you. There's a time and a place. And one of the things that I noticed, at least from the OJ trial, but I've seen it in several, you guys watch crime documentaries, I'm sure you've seen it too, where the way that the press handles things can absolutely affect the outcome of the trial. And when they sensationalize things and show this person as assumed guilty rather than assumed innocent, a lot of times juries will convict when they shouldn't be. We have not a lot, but I've seen a handful of cases that got overturned on DNA evidence that were basically tried in the court of public opinion first. So if you had your way, do you think you would allow, right now, several of the courts have like the Zoom where they allow, I guess, watching, but you can't really interact with the court, and it's not the same as allowing TV cameras in. What's your take on that?
I have to admit, it's kind of a torn decision. I mean, I understand the public's need, especially in the 21st century. We're in a kind of a post-COVID world, whereas before that, none of that stuff was done. I mean, I guess I'm old school in the event that I think if you want to see what's going on in court, you come to the courthouse. Okay. Much like I'm kind of old school. I think if you vote, you should go vote at the voting places.
Right.
In all of my trials that I've even done in federal court, some of my contemporaries on the other side are much younger and certainly exercise and use a lot more in the way of technology. I was always taught as a young lawyer is that to trust technology at your own peril, because if it fails, your case can be jeopardized, as can your client. So the judge will sometimes look at me and grin and says, "Mr. Earnst, are you ready?" And I show him my yellow pad and I say, "I'm ready to go, Your Honor." Because I kind of believe at the end of the day that we still need to focus on people in person, presenting evidence in front of a judge or arguments in front of a judge. Some places it has its place. Like if you're doing a bigger civil litigation, it's just a status conference and they don't want to pay $4.15 a gallon to travel. I could see it in situations like that. But for the most part, there's a reason why courtrooms are in a courthouse. And I think that if you give people an opportunity to be heard, it should be heard by those that are supposed to hear it and not by those that are not. Because again, the problem with a lot of these technology, you don't know who's listening. You know who's behind the camera, and like you could be having hearing and they can say there's no one there. And I've had hearings where I know darn well that people have been listening and that should not have been. And these are cases that normally they would not be allowed in the courtroom to hear it. So it's a difficult thing to navigate as a judge. You have to use your judgment and your experience to say, okay, maybe this is a circumstance that it should be. Yeah. But like anything else as being a judge, you need to judge things on a case-by-case basis. But again, as far as actual cameras in the courtroom, I would admit that I probably lean against it because of all the bad things that come with it.
Okay. That, you know what? I will admit you brought up an interesting point, because we've seen we've seen cases where, like, for example, they made the jury leave the room, but the cameras stay on, and so the general public can hear what's being said, whereas the jury has been sequestered because it's procedural or whatever. I'm not a lawyer. I'm doing the best I can, but stuff that the jurors don't necessarily need to hear at that moment, and there's no way to know whether that information is actually being conveyed to the jurors via some that I did not. I'll admit, as someone who has generally been in favor of more and more transparency, I didn't consider that aspect. So I gotta give you a little hat tip on that one. I didn't think of that.
There you go.
So I have heard, I don't know, I haven't verified the stats, but I've heard that we have a lawyer shortage in Indiana. Would you agree with that?
I would. Actually, it's more acute here in Northwest Indiana. I was at a seminar over in Maryville where we were addressed by several federal judges and magistrates, and they talked about the adverse effect it's had on judicial internships for firms, for prosecuting attorneys' offices or public defenders' offices, because without the law school locally, because I'm a Valparaiso graduate, obviously, and I obviously it's a school that no longer exists, and there's a void in this area. And we have to be also cognizant that, let's face it, unless you're really from this area, a lot of people from Notre Dame Law School or University of Chicago Law School are not necessarily going to want to come here for an internship unless they have some type of some kind of roots here. And so, and as a matter of fact, that my former firm, we noticed that when they were trying to hire people, is that, and it wasn't quite as it was. And I also know with the prosecuting attorney's offices, the U.S. attorney's offices, this isn't as much of a destination. And without that law school that for a long time fed internships to firms and law firms and practices, prosecutors' offices, and judicial internships was an incredible resource that we lost, and it will not be replenished. And we also have to look at young people now, look at the cost of the education versus the cost of what they may get in return. And they're making a cost benefit analysis that is not worth the investment. Right. I mean, when I applied to law school in the 90s, there were several thousand people applying for 200 positions. At the last several years at Valparaiso, I know that they were trying to do everything they could, including lowering some standards to get their quota in, because the younger generations weren't going into the legal profession. And unfortunately, it led to that law school's demise. But even nationwide, that's a problem.
Okay, so let me ask you, why do you think people should look into practicing law versus another career?
Well, I guess it has to be what you really want to do, because let's face it, there's a lot of days you wonder, why am I doing this? Versus, I'm the son of a plumber and an electrician HVAC. My hands were all thumbs, and so I had to do something else for a living, but I would have otherwise been third generation in that field.
Oh, wow.
But my father, my mother recognized that probably something more intellectual was in my wheelhouse. My math teachers recognized, when I was trying to think about being an engineer, told me that you don't get very good grades in math, but you argue the case real well. Maybe you should be a lawyer. And so I think in some ways it's having to find a calling. It's certainly not something where, like I grew up in the days, the 1980s and 90s of LA Law and some of these wonderful shows on television. It's not all that. I mean, you can make a decent living doing it, but you're not going to get the riches you want. But what's more, you're going to have to be willing to work hard. I mean, some of these people now, they expect a 40-hour-a-week job and a paycheck, versus when I started, we probably were averaging 60, 70 hours a week for salary, because you had to do that. You would go in on Saturdays. You would go in on Mondays. You didn't leave before 6 o'clock, except maybe on a Friday. And you unfortunately have some people now that they don't want to make that kind of commitment. And I understand why. It's not for everybody. But, again, if it's something you have a passion doing, I think we as practitioners need to more encourage younger generations that it can be a calling you can follow and get fulfillment in your career.
Okay. So kind of a little oddball question. What aspect of practicing law or lawyering did you find the most surprising after graduating law school, with whatever your expectations were?
Really, when you graduate law school, you think, okay, I'm going to be getting in a lot of these bigger, cerebral, heady type of issues. Mm-hmm. And you realize when you start practicing, you start doing criminal defense or family law or even run-of-the-mill civil litigation, is that how minute some of the details can be, how potentially petty people can be sometimes in their disputes, versus like you hit a divorce case where, when they were married, the father or the mother would spend whatever they had to for their kid, but when you told them how much they had paid for child support and they weren't in the house, they were losing their minds, even though that was less than they were probably paying while they were in the house.
Yeah.
And having to explain that to them, or explain when they have two lawyers billing $200 an hour, that arguing over the lawn furniture is probably not a good use of that attorney's time. And having to recognize you're dealing with people, you're dealing with emotions.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I think my 29 years of actually representing clients in courts, federal and state throughout Northwest Indiana, has given me that wisdom to be able to get through that layer and to hopefully get to that situation where you can calm people down, make sure they stick to the facts, they remain civil with each other and to the court, and by the same turn that the court is civil to them and give them a full and fair opportunity to be heard, to resolve their disputes. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to resolve disputes, whether it be defending somebody in a murder trial or representing somebody in a landlord-tenant issue. One of the things I was very proud of that I was part of was a litigation team that fought clear up to the Supreme Court of Indiana for the rights of the users of Lake Michigan to be of public use and not private use.
Which is awesome, by the way. Thank you for that.
That was called the Gunderson decision, where some private landowners thought that they owned the entire beach, and we represented a group of interested citizens in Long Beach and surrounding area that litigated all the way to Supreme Court and had a landmark case that said no, those are for the enjoyment of all along the shores of Lake Michigan, that was preserved for the public when Indiana became a state, as when it came out of the Northwest Territories, and that now obviously you can walk along those beaches without barricades, without being harassed in any way. And I was very proud to be part of that litigation. And again, I've taken part in very high profile criminal litigation as well. So you have to have that diversity, because Superior 3 hears a lot of criminal cases. And I was a public defender there for almost 2.5, 3 years when I first started my role as a public defender back in the late 90s.
Oh, wow.
And so I know that court very well. And I also know if something gets dropped in your lap, like you have to conflict in a heavy felony case, maybe it has to come from somewhere else, or it was a complex piece of civil litigation, I have that experience that I can bring to the table. But I also have the ability to say, hey, that's something I don't yet know. And to be able to reach out and do the research and do the work to find the answer, or more importantly, who to talk to with my years of experience with people on the bench, to say, have you ever had this before? And you can, in a 5-second conversation, get the answer. So it's also having the humility to know what you don't know and be willing to look it up and do the work.
I think that's really important. Not just, obviously, a lot of attorneys in the area have many, many years experience, but knowing what you don't know is, I think, one of those little things that people should pay attention to. Okay. So has there been a case, you just mentioned one, maybe that's it, that has stuck with you, either good or bad? What did you learn from it? And did it change how you practiced law?
Actually I did. And it was very early in my career. And this is probably late 90s, early 2000. There was a person that had been charged with robbing people at rest areas, coming up behind them and striking them, knocking them unconscious. In fact, one of them was killed. And I was a young lawyer coming up at the time, learning the ropes, and I was put as second chair with a more seasoned attorney. The gentleman's name was Don Harner. He was at one time a judge in Superior Court number 2 and was later a public defender in Superior Court number 1 for a long time, and I was paired with him to do the case. And this gentleman was very large. He was probably 6'6", every bit of 350, and also knew the martial arts and had actually torn the courtroom apart on one occasion. And the facts and circumstances were quite heinous. This was a robbery. The gentleman had been struck in the back of the head with a hammer and was permanently disabled. And when he testified, it was very obvious. And obviously, our client was not always very grateful for some of the advice we were trying to do for him. Sometimes he would make his own objections. But I remember the attorney that was teaching me told me, he says, Kurt, here's the problem, or here's what you need to know. Whether this guy are guilty or innocent is not our issue so much as we have to make sure he gets a fair trial. If we don't give him a fair trial and he gets convicted, we should not sleep at night. Our job is to make sure that he got a fair trial, that we did everything we could to advance his cause on his behalf, regardless of whether he liked whether we were doing it or not. And only then can we sleep well at night. And I've carried that with me my entire career. In addition, when I was in college, I had a law school class taught by a former lawyer. And one of the books he gave us to read was Gideon's Trumpet, which was the case Gideon B. Wainwright out of the 60s. That guaranteed the right of people in state court to an attorney. Back in the 60s, there was no right to an attorney in state court, only in federal court. And that landmark case before the Supreme Court established that the right to counsel was guaranteed through the 14th Amendment to apply to the states, much like in the federal government, which gave rise then to the public defender system we have today.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's that's a really good answer. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so a little compare and contrast slightly. So we do have a candidate for Superior Court 3 that's a fairly recent transplant as opposed to you. You've lived, how long have you lived in LaPorte County?
I've lived here since my graduation in 1996.
So like 30 years.
Just
right?
about, yes.
But Northwest Indiana, you've lived in your whole life?
No, actually, I grew up in West Central Illinois, northwest of Peoria. But I went to Valparaiso Law School in '93. And I stayed in this area. This where happened to be where the job was that fit what I wanted to do. I was looking for a middle-sized town, a middle-sized firm that kind of focused on litigation and representing actual clients. And I was in Michigan City and lived there for quite a while. When I met my wife, we eventually settled more towards the LaPorte area, where my daughter goes to high school at LaPorte High School. My wife is a lifelong graduate lifelong resident of LaPorte County and a Red Devil and Elston graduate. But this is where this is where I call home, and I'm a firm believer in community, which is shown by my public service that I've done in areas versus whether it be fire department or Boys and Girls Club or teen court or things of that nature. And I believe it's important to work where you live and to serve where you live.
So do you believe that living here or at least close to LaPorte County for as long as you have will make you a better judge for LaPorte County?
Well, I think I've made the relationships, I think. Being here longer, I mean, obviously when I go, I'm almost at the point now where I'm getting old enough that a lot of people I would know, like in law enforcement, other places have actually gone through the ranks. But, being here longer, people know me by name and reputation. Even though I'm a defense attorney, I always have had very good respect from law enforcement and I to them. And as a matter of fact, few of them would comment where I get done with the cross-examination, but I would also afterwards thank them for their service and thank them for testifying because, again, it is a job. It's a profession, and they have a job to do as well. We need to show that respect. But I believe being in that community where you're accessible and people know who you are and know what to expect from you, not only as a lawyer, but as a person, can be very valuable. And again, as judges, a lot of times we may have to be called on in the middle of the night or early morning hours for things like search warrants or things like that. And suffice it to say, there have been times in the past where I've had prosecutors send police to my house because they forgot my phone number, drove my wife nuts. But they would actually show up knocking on the door, Mr. Earnst, so-and-so needs to talk to you. And they forgot they couldn't get your number. So I was there and accessible to answer those concerns.
Yeah, I'm sure your wife was thrilled.
She did. I said, A, there was no lights going on, and B, no one was taken away in custody. But again, there was that accessibility, which I do think is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so other than being a lawyer, which is it's kind of a prerequisite for judge, what side quests or volunteer work have you done? And how has that altered your worldview and the way you would administer justice if elected?
Well, I can tell you, I'll start with the teen court program, which is a program designed for juveniles that are redirected for first offender treatment. And it's actually where a lawyer presides as the judge, and all the other participants are students.
Oh.
The lawyers, the defense attorneys, the prosecutors, the jury, and they've already pled guilty. So it's basically a sentencing hearing, but they have to go through the process of seeing what a trial is like and actually passing judgment on their peers, which was very, very, very successful. I did that for several years up until my daughter was born in 2009. I stepped back some of my volunteer work to spend with my family. But seeing the interest that young people had and how inquisitive they were and answering their questions not only kind of invigorated me to an extent, but also I felt like I was maybe passing along something to where maybe some of them would follow along in the whether it be in law enforcement or working for the court system or in being a lawyer. I also was a past board president with the Boys and Girls Club of Michigan City. We had when I was a board member, we had some turbulent times with former executive directors, and we had to address personnel issues and kind of reinvent the ship. And eventually we got a gentleman named Al Whitlow. You may know real well, God bless him. He was with us for quite a long time. I think he has since passed. But we brought him in to kind of redirect the ship, as it were. So I had to deal with those kinds of issues about how do we redirect and repurpose the ship. Being in private practice, I was a partner for 20 years at my office. And so obviously understanding issues of running an office, doing a budget, dealing with personnel issues. And then lastly, being a volunteer firefighter. I mean, I'm actually third generation chief. My dad, back where I was back in Illinois, was a volunteer chief. My grandfather before that. And sometimes it can be a thankless job because everything goes to you and you got to eventually make somebody angry, but you have to manage people and personalities and try to establish a common goal. Up in Long Beach in the last couple of years, we've just constructed a $3.2 million public safety building. And I worked on I worked on the specs for our new fire engine, which we took delivery of in November, which was $850,000. You have to deal with issues of how to budget money, spend money, spec things out, listen to people's concerns, make sure that you take care of things, and then, at 2, 3 in the morning, wake up in the dead of night and go respond to a call, whether it be somebody's having a heart attack or a stroke, or whether it's a structure fire, or just someone that just fell out of bed and they're aged and they need someone to help get them up. And so I think those things have driven me to basically be able to make decisions on my feet, and in addition to my trial practice, which has been pretty extensive, and to basically appreciate giving back in some way to the community that's been very good to me and my family.
Okay. I mean, when do you sleep?
Not much.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, well, I would say at least you're prepared. So like if elected, I'm assuming, I don't know how the whole system works, but would you be responsible for search warrants and
Yes.
whatnot? Okay.
From what I understand, the way I've always been told is that the judges are on kind of a rotating thing, so they're not always being the same people called all the time, which makes sense. It's just like being a prosecutor. Not all the prosecutors are being on call at the same time. They're on a rotation.
Okay.
But making sure that you're available, because again, I've handled the most major felony cases that you can imagine, and the most simple of cases as well. And my work in federal court, a lot of times we have to deal with issues of suppressions in the Fourth Amendment, searches and seizures, arrest warrants, search warrants, things of that nature. And to where having at least that background to build upon, to where if you are called in the early morning hours, you have a pretty idea what you know. And because some of these things can be time sensitive, and they don't have the time to say, well, let me look it up and get back to you.
Right.
Or let's wait till morning and have a hearing on it. Sometimes they have to have those things. Law enforcement needs to do their job, and part of our jobs as judges to, again, effectuate justice is to be available to do that.
Okay, so you're ready for that aspect of it. It sounds like you've been, not necessarily search warrants, but it sounds like you've been having to wake up in the middle of the night to respond to various emergencies for
Absolutely.
quite a while now. As
28 years, and again, as a kid, I would wake up in our hometown. I mean, you'd wake up in the middle of the night. My dad would have to go somewhere, and those days they didn't have pagers. They had a siren downtown, and of course, our dog would howl when she heard that. So it was in our dog howl. So I've been born and raised with the idea of having to give out all hours of the night and switch gears in a moment. But again, that's what volunteers do throughout this country. I'm just hoping to bring that experience to be the public servant to this county as our next judge of Superior Court number 3.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. So I have a really, really important question, and I'm going to tell the viewers, I spent a really long time crafting this question, and it is not, it is the best that I can do, put it that way. But sure. I think it's an important question to ask. Okay. So in regards to impartiality, which is a critical skill for a judge, at least in my opinion. Okay. So all lawyers that run for judge, but all lawyers in general, especially candidates, say, I'm going to be totally impartial and respect the law rather than personal feelings. That we kind of expect that for, people to say. But one thing that we all know as regular citizens is networks and friendships it's prevalent in all areas of government. We see it no matter who's elected, this friend, this group, that group. What would you say to people that may have any concerns or questions about any past associations or representations or any perceived favoritisms?
Well, I think the first thing, it's incumbent upon a judge in every case, if you feel that even there's something potentially the slightest bit not proper, is to bring it to the party's attention. I mean, perfect example, again, I practiced with a firm for 28 years. Now, under the rules of ethics, I've been away with the firm long enough that they're not prohibited from practicing in front of me if I were to be the judge. Most of the other lawyers in the county that would be there would know that as well, so it'd be almost unspoken. But to your point, if I had a situation, I had an out of attorney, I said, counsel, I think I need to bring this to your attention. I said, I don't believe it's a problem, but if you feel it is, obviously I would certainly entertain your arguments on that. And if you feel very strongly, that perhaps get the case bumped somewhere else. Okay. I liken it a lot to, they used to talk about courage. Is that courage is not the absence of fear.
Right.
It is the resistance of fear and mastery of the fear. It's the same thing with things of that nature, to where there's always going to be issues where you may have heartstrings or you may know somebody a little bit, but at the end of the day,
Right.
you need to check those things at the door to be the professional that the public has elected you to be. And I know some people say, well, that's well and good, but how can we know that? Unfortunately, sometimes you have to take people at their word and judge them on their integrity from how they've conducted themselves in the past, and also make sure you make sure that that oath that you take as a judge and the code of ethics that you agree to follow are upheld, which means sometimes you may have to say, you know what, I just got to be honest, this is probably one I probably shouldn't hear. And I've had judges say that in my career as well. And
Okay.
the part of my advantage that I have of being around Northwest Indiana, federal and state, I've seen a lot of different judges in this area, both good and some not necessarily good. And I've kind of taken mental notes. I'm like, that's how I would handle it if I were the case. Or I've even had times where it's been ruled against me by saying, you know what, they ruled against me. I understand where they came to it. I respect it. And again, at the end of the day, all you can do as a judge is to be fair and impartial, to be civil with people, to give them an opportunity to be heard, and rule on the evidence and the merits of the case and the law and nothing else. And frankly, if you can't make those commitments, you have no business being on the bench.
Okay. All right. Really good answer. And I like, at least me personally, watching some of the trials that I've seen, it's kind of obvious that maybe a judge will like a particular attorney a little more, or they'll let them get away with, with a little more as far as before they go, okay, rein it in, counselor, kind of thing. And that's like the low end. But obviously there are concerns, not with you or your competitor
Right.
necessarily, but with all of these offices that people run for. There's like potential there. And it's good to hear that you recognize that the perception is, possible, and you are not unwilling to entertain recusal or whatever. I'm trying to do the best I can with these lawyer terms I heard on
Sure.
LA
Well, I mean,
Law.
again, like especially I go to federal court, which I mean, people get nervous. I mean, it's still the same courtroom, the same rules, but there's a little extra feeling of, hey, we're in a different place here. I mean, you don't
Right.
hear the gallery of people talking. Lawyers don't say things snidely, or if they do, they get shot down very immediately. So I've done federal criminal work for over 20 years.
Okay.
I did it. I did as a conflict, what's called the CJA, which were conflict attorneys for public defenders when they needed them, and then now I do it full time. I also did retain work in those venues as well. And you didn't mess around in those courts. You didn't. You weren't flippant. The defendants weren't flippant. If they were, they found out very quickly they were in a different place. And so I like to think that I've taken that part of my experience to heart as well, and hope to keep it to the bench. Now, are there times where things need to be a bit of levity? I mean, are there times things are going to happen? I mean, sometimes the people will say the darndest things, and you're going to laugh, and everybody laughs. I've done it even in federal court.
Yeah.
I've had times where I had a juror in one of my cases last year pass out when answering a question. We had to go render medical assistance.
Oh, wow.
So, and of course, the judge is looking at me. He says, "This has ever happened to you before, Kurt?" I said, "Actually, yes, it has, Judge." He said, "Oh, that's right. You're a first responder." So he let me and another person take over for it.
Right.
But you take that wealth of wisdom that comes from the diverse experience that I think I bring to the bench, to
Yeah.
where it's like the old Kenny Rogers song. You know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run.
Yep.
And
Gambler.
you have to be able to you have to know what the right circumstance is for that case. As a general rule, maintain the professionalism, but there might be times where someone may need a little bit of a calmer hand, or someone need a more of a firmer hand, or there may be time for levity. And again, the good judges know how to do that and when, and also more importantly, when not to.
Okay. I agree with all of that. I think that it's important for any potential judge or elected judge to remember, and it sounds like you do, that all of the people coming into these courtrooms, they all have their individual lives, they all have their individual problems. Hence your or I should say co-establishment, assistance in establishing the Veterans Court, which again is huge. I cannot stress enough how critical that is, because I have a good friend who is involved with a veterans organization, and the stories of people that needed more from our government are absolutely heartbreaking. And it's good to hear that there's at least some people out there that recognize the struggles that they go through.
The bottom
So
line is that they served us, and as a result, they're suffering. We have nothing but an obligation to serve them in return.
agreed. Okay. What do you think could be done more to, well, first, do you think there should be done more aside from cameras in the courtroom to embrace technology with the judicial system? Or do you think that that's something that basically should be kept as far at arm's length as possible?
Well, I mean, it kind of depends on what you're talking about. I mean, any technology, especially it's in infancy, is something that has to be suspect. And again,
Right.
judges, like most people, especially when you get older in years, you get more suspect of whether it work or not. But you have to keep an open mind. I mean, again, I practiced at a time before we had email, before we had reliable online research. We had to look at books.
Feels
I
like
mean,
forever ago, doesn't it?
I mean, when I was in college, my student ID was my social security number, so I come from a different era.
Right.
So I think you have to keep an open mind, because there can be things. Matter of fact, in my office now, they're looking to use technology to assist with discovery or to assist even with trial exhibits or things in court that are on a notepad. I want to learn it. I want to know it because it may be something that may be available. I may not use it very often, but I at least want to know that I've taken the time to look at it. And again, like being a judge in a courtroom, objectively weighing the pros and cons of it and see if it's something that would be useful or not. So you never want to say never, but you also want to have a little bit of a hesitation before you jump in with both feet.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So obviously, Chat GPT and the rise of these AIs, and more the people that use them, like I talked about earlier, with the lawyers that are showing up and referencing cases that don't exist because they ran it through Chat GPT. I guess there's a legal service. Have you heard of this? Robot lawyer or robo lawyer or something?
I may have heard the term at some point.
Yeah, it's essentially an AI attorney, and courts all over the country are having problems with these people showing up. And then, of course, you have your sovereign citizens who Google something and then show up and assume that they know the law better than the attorneys or the judge. So, how do you anticipate that getting worse?
I think it's going to be more prevalent. I think it's incumbent upon judges to do their own research. And the judges that I've respected the most are the ones that have looked at both briefs, let's say in a case that needed to be briefed. And when they issue their opinion, they even come up with some law that maybe we didn't do. So they clearly did that additional work. As a famous president once of ours said, trust but verify. I think it's incumbent as a judge, too, to not accept everything, even from the best of attorneys, because it is becoming more prevalent, to check the work. Because again, your job isn't just a rubber stamp or say, well, this lawyer has done great in the past, so therefore I must accept everything he or she says is gospel, or this lawyer isn't. You need to do the work to read what is it there, to confirm and verify that not only is it good law, but does it in fact say what they say it said, which sometimes can happen otherwise. And to
Yeah.
also maybe also do your own independent analysis and research to make sure that nothing was missed. Because again, you are the final arbiter of those decisions. Now, thankfully, we have appellate courts and Supreme Court to check our work as well. But I think it's incumbent on a trial attorney to get it right the first time.
Do you think that then this is kind of I didn't even have this one planned, but I just thought of it. So do you think that it reflects poorly on a judge if their stuff is constantly being overturned via appeal?
Well, it certainly would raise a red flag, I think. But again,
Okay.
you never know. You may have a thing where there's a high volume of cases. Things can get missed. Lawyers or judges are human like anyone else. But certainly, like anything else, if it happens on a more frequent basis, obviously it's noticeable. And one would hope and think that the higher ups, whether it be the Court of Appeals or the board, the ethical considerations that we fall under, would come down as well. Or again, we as lawyers have an obligation, although it's a double-edged sword, to say, well, you have to report these things. But of course, if you do and nothing happens, good luck going in front of that judge the next time. I mean, those are
Yeah.
practical
Yeah.
considerations. But certainly you don't want to be afraid of being overturned. You want to
Okay.
make sure that you feel like you've done the best job that you can. Again, sometimes the Court of Appeals might see it differently. And I've seen cases where the court has ruled one way and the Court of Appeals just frankly just felt differently.
Right.
and saw it
Right.
differently. And it was nothing that judge particularly did. It just, there was a different group of judges that interpreted it differently. And the Supreme Court does that on a regular basis. They reverse Court of Appeals decisions saying, hey, you got it wrong. Just, we think this is the more right answer.
Right.
And
Right.
so that's why we have to have those checks and balances. But at the end of the day, as a trial lawyer, you want to try to make sure you do the work to where at least when you give an opinion, you feel like you've given it your best effort. And if it's appealed, it's because there's a change of opinion, not necessarily because you got the law wrong or the facts wrong.
Okay. No, that's really solid. I like that. So do you remember, did you watch I can't remember his name, but the crazy guy who ran over the people, um, Brooks, Daryl Brooks. Did you watch any of the Daryl Brooks trial?
Conceitedly, I did not.
Okay. Okay. After, when you get a chance, look up the judge,
Okay.
in particular, the judge that was hearing the case. I think me personally, I think she did a rock solid job of ensuring that there couldn't be any procedural grounds for appeal. And he was so annoying, Brooks. He was so annoying to watch and listen to. But I think the judge did a phenomenal job there. When you get a chance, I'd be interested in your opinion as to whether you agree or if you think she kind of went a little too hands off and let him ramble too long.
You know, and again, the problem is that there's not necessarily always a right way. I mean, sometimes
Right.
every judge is like, we're human beings, and so you're all going to approach things differently. You should at least have the same common goals and objectives on conduct and integrity and behavior. But again, some judges are more loose and more free, and some are very rigid, where you're not sure if they're even blinking.
Right.
But at the end of the day, as long as you are fair and impartial, you give everybody a full opportunity to be heard. But by the same token, don't let them ramble on needlessly or for things that aren't relevant. Like you mentioned, things like sovereign citizens or things of that nature, to where they're just clearly doing things. And I've had clients or defendants that I've observed that they'll take advantage of that if a judge doesn't rein it in. So it's, again, part of that experience and wisdom to know, okay, in this case, I have to be a little bit more firm, but in another case, perhaps I need to give, like a lot of things that you, Spirit 3, they do cases where neither side have a lawyer, small claims. You have to give them a
Right.
little bit more leeway because they don't know the system and they're there to get their cases resolved. And so you have to, maybe in that case, be a little bit more free. But versus if you have two seasoned attorneys, you maybe rein it in because frankly, they should know their jobs and they shouldn't have you do it for them.
Right. So just to kind of recap and clarify for viewers or listeners, Superior Court 3 tends to handle small claims, lesser misdemeanors, and do they do child support at all? Or that's family court, right?
Yeah. Generally, what Superior 3 does is they do misdemeanor cases, traffic citations, because they cover like part of the toll road and, of
Okay.
course, the interstate as well. They do small claims, landlord tenant eviction type situations. They do hear more complex civil litigation because in LaPorte County, as a lawyer, you have the right to file a civil case wherever you want.
Oh,
the
okay.
the,
That's
the clerks
interesting.
the clerks do not control it like in other counties. So I've had more complex civil litigation in front of Superior 3. You might get a conflict case that may be a family law case, which they generally don't have, but I did that my entire career as well. Or you might get selected as a special judge from another county where there's a change of venue and they may need you to step into a more high profile case or a higher level case because it has to be revenued. And so you have to have someone that has had the experience that's done all those things. I mean, it's easy to say, well, this is all this court does. Now, if you get in the bigger counties, you may say, all they do is this. And that's true. Like over
Right.
in St. Joe County or Lake County or Marion County, it's a criminal court or it's a misdemeanor court or it's a felony court or strictly a civil court. In smaller counties like ours, you're going to get a little bit of a mixed bag, but as a general
Yeah.
proposition, you're not going to hear too many high level felonies. You're not going to necessarily hear too many high level civil cases. But again, in my experience, I've done everything from contract litigation to civil litigation. I represented the library for over 20 years. So I certainly was involved with contract disputes and labor disputes. And so you have to have that broad, diverse experience in case it comes to you. But by the same token, you also have to handle volume. Superior 3 is a very high volume court, which is another
Oh,
thing too, to
okay.
where you're not hearing like 4 or 5 cases in a criminal call. You may be hearing 30, 40, 50 cases in a morning.
Oh,
And
wow.
so you have to administer justice, give everything the right to be heard, but also move cases along for the interest of the next person. So you
Right.
have to be able to think on your feet, know what you're doing, and administer justice and give people a fair opportunity, but also make sure people aren't there till 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they got there at 8:30 in the morning.
Right, right. That's a common, I would say, a common complaint from people who have to go to court for whatever reason. Let's face it, our legal system is very overburdened.
Absolutely.
There are constantly, at least in my experience, let me make sure I clarify that. At least in my experience, going to court for whatever reason, to watch a trial, to testify, to this, to that, it seems like people are there for a long time. It'll get scheduled for early in the morning, and you're not heard until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Do you think that there's a better way that can be done, or is it simply volume is the problem?
Well, I mean, you're as a judge, you take the cases that are presented to you. You don't get to pick and choose. Well, I'm only going to hear so many cases today, or I don't want to hear anything tomorrow or the next day. I always tell people it's kind of like being in a doctor's office. When you're the next person, the wait is excruciating, but the person that's being treated, it's never long enough. And so
that's
it's finding that fine line to make sure that no one rambles on needlessly. Reminding people when you've already ruled on an issue, or if something has been determined, or if it's something that's not to be heard that particular day, and to move cases along. But by the same token, again, you're there to hear people's disputes. You're here to weigh their problems and make decisions, and you have to take the time that is necessary to do the job appropriately, or A, you're not administering justice, or B, you're going to get reversed and it's going to look ugly.
Okay, fair enough. And I think that's really important that I guess people understand not just that it'd be nice if things move along, but it's also really critical to make sure that when it's someone's turn, that they have all the time that they need and deserve, so that their case can be fairly heard.
Absolutely.
So, do you know offhand who handles the court technology, like the Zoom and stuff like that? Who's responsible for that? Is it the judge for each court?
I believe that the LaPorte County has a common IT department that I think oversees things in general. And then as supplementary, usually I have found that each court has at least someone within the office that also is proficient in it to an extent, to make sure if there's minor problems, they can get things going. But again, that's the problem with technology. It's great only when it works.
Right.
and again, the thing is, if everybody's in the courtroom and you can look at them and they can look at you, that almost always works.
Right.
But again, we're in the 21st century, and some of these things are just a fact of life that we have to accommodate and try to make as functional as possible and as consistent as possible.
Okay. So I would, excuse me. So based upon what you've said, you always prefer in-person court over remote appearance.
That is my preference. But again, there are circumstances where it's necessary or understandable. And again, you have to have that flexibility of approach to a situation. But I did find that when we got away from COVID, that people I still like, well, can't I just do it from home? Or like, if you're in your car and you're like a block away, I really think you should be in the courtroom, frankly. But like if you're a lawyer and you had an emergency, or you're double booked and you didn't mean to be, or if it's something that's very routine, like a civil matter where you don't necessarily have to be in the same room, you have to have that flexibility as well. But as a general proposition, in person is something that I think most judges would prefer, because frankly, it's the way it was meant to be.
Right.
And I think and again, much like, again, you and I are talking by video, and that's fine. But I think it would probably be much better if we were sitting in the same room looking across from each other. So it's always better, but sometimes you have to deal with what you have.
Right. Exactly. So listen, I want to thank you very much. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to kind of tell the people why you believe you're the better option, and where they can learn. Let me run this thing again. Where they can learn more about you. You do have a group on Facebook, right?
Correct. Earnst for Judge. You can see that here.
Yep. Right at the bottom.
Here you go. But again, my name is Kurt Earnst. I'm running in the Republican primary for Superior 3, and I'm looking to be your next judge of Superior Court number 3. Again, I've lived here, and I work here. I live here. My family has been here. I've been here since 1996. I'm a firm believer that being a judge is the highest purpose you can have as a lawyer of public service, and being a judge is just that, a public service. And I believe that my 29 years of diverse experience in federal and state court, civil and criminal litigation, my dedication to being a volunteer, both as a teen court judge, as a board member of the Boys and Girls Club of Michigan City, and being a chief of a local fire department, give me that nexus of things that I believe are necessary to have that diversity to be your next judge is Superior Court number 3, and to build upon the foundation of previous judges and the high standards they've set. And I think I'm the one for that job, and I'm asking for your vote.
All right. I can't say anything. I'm not going to say anything. Look,
Should you.
Nor should I. I'm doing my very best to present as fair of a playing field as I can.
Sure.
Because it's a primary and it's important. But I do greatly respect both of you, and I greatly appreciate the fact that both of you have taken the time to come onto the show and let people meet you and get to know you. And thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk again soon, hopefully.
Thank you. Remember, Earnst for judge in the Republican primary, May 5th. Vote for Earnst.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Kurt Earnst. He is running, as he said, in the Republican primary. Guys, I cannot articulate enough how important voting in the primary is. It is absolutely critical. Many races, I'm not saying this one, but many races are decided in the primary. There are some areas that, for example, are solidly red. We all know in Indiana is very, very Republican. Some areas less so, some areas more so. So if you want to decide a particular race, I highly recommend that you vote in the primary. If we're talking Michigan City, Democrat primary. If we're talking the rest of the county, Republican primary. That's just in general. There are different, scenarios for each, but in general, that's how it works. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from one. Tomorrow night, same time, 7 p.m., we'll hear from his challenger, and I will be asking the same questions and offer the same little scrolling thing, doing my best to be fair. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Thank you for hearing Mr. Earnst out, potentially his honor later. We'll see. Without further ado, God bless you, God bless Indiana, and God bless the United States of America. Hope you have a wonderful evening, and good night.
Appearance on Dion's Daily Dose does not imply endorsement from or by any candidate or guest. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by Dion Bergeron or Dion's Daily Dose are his own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any guest. Material and information presented is for general information purposes only. The Dion's Daily Dose name in all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owners, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Dion.